It was a chilly afternoon in early March when I stood in front of the mirror trying to smooth out the wrinkles on my old blue dress. I had worn it for years. It wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable. It reminded me of all the days I had worked double shifts at the diner to keep our small family afloat. The fabric was soft from years of washing and the hem had started to fade, but I still loved it because it carried memories, not style. That day, my daughter Emily was coming home. After months away from the city, she was planning her wedding, and I had been waiting anxiously to see her. When I heard the sound of her car pulling into the driveway, my heart raced. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to the door. When she stepped out of the car, she looked radiant, her hair perfectly styled, her nails done, her dress crisp and elegant. She hugged me, but I felt her glance linger on my old blue dress. For a moment she smiled, but there was something different in her eyes. I tried to ignore it and said, "I made your favorite pie, sweet apple cinnamon, just like you used to love when you were little." She laughed lightly. "Thanks, Mom, I'm sure it's perfect." We sat at the table, and she began showing me photos of her wedding plans, the venue, the flowers, the bridesmaids' dresses. It all looked beautiful. I listened, carefully nodding, smiling, trying to remember every detail she spoke, with excitement about how everything had to be perfect, about how she wanted to impress everyone. I told her she would be the most beautiful bride in the world. She smiled, but then her eyes drifted toward me again, and she said softly, "Mom, maybe for the wedding you could buy a new dress. You know, something modern, something that fits in with the theme." For a moment the room went silent. My hands froze around the mug of coffee I was holding. I forced a smile and said, "Of course, sweetheart, I'll see what I can do." She didn't mean to hurt me. I told myself she was just caught up in the excitement. After she left that evening, I stood in front of my closet staring at the same old dresses lined up like a timeline of my life. The diner uniform, the simple Sunday dress, the blue one I was wearing. I thought about how many years had gone by without buying something new for myself. I had always put Emily first. Her school, her clothes, her future, that was what mothers did, right? The next morning I took the bus into town and stopped at a small thrift store, the kind of place where clothes were piled high on racks, and the smell of detergent and old fabric filled the air. I found a soft cream-colored dress, simple but lovely. It cost $20, and I hesitated before buying it, thinking about the bills due next week, but I told myself this was for Emily, for her big day, and maybe just this once it was okay. When Emily visited again a few days later, I proudly showed her the dress, holding it up with a smile. She looked at it for a moment, then laughed lightly. "Mom, that's sweet, but it's not really what people wear to weddings these days. You know, I just don't want you to feel out of place in front of everyone." I felt my chest tighten, and I laughed along, pretending it didn't sting. I said, "Don't worry, dear, I'll find something better. I always do." That night I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table I had saved for years to buy. The house felt too quiet. The clock ticked, and the wind outside howled softly through the trees. I looked down at my hands rough from years of work and thought about all the times I had stayed up late, sewing Emily's school costumes, fixing her dresses, making her favorite lunches. I had done everything to make her life easier, and now somehow I felt like I didn't belong in the picture she was painting for her future. Days passed, and I kept busy at the diner. The customers came and went. The coffee brewed, the laughter echoed. I smiled and served and tucked my sadness away like an old photograph one evening. As I wiped down the counter, my friend Carla asked if I was okay. I hesitated, then told her about Emily's wedding and how I wasn't sure what to wear. Carla smiled gently and said, "Honey, you could walk in there wearing a paper bag and you'd still be the most beautiful woman in that room because you raised her with love. That's what people will see." Her words comforted me for a moment, but deep down the ache lingered. It wasn't about the dress. It was about feeling like the years of sacrifice had somehow faded into the background, replaced by something shinier, newer. That weekend, Emily invited me to a wedding fitting in the city. I went along quietly, holding my purse tightly as I followed her into a boutique full of mirrors and silk and soft lights. The dresses shimmered like dreams. Emily twirled in front of the mirror as the tailor pinned the fabric around her waist. She looked breathtaking. I clapped and said, "You look perfect, sweetheart." She smiled widely. I know, Mom, isn't it beautiful? I nodded, tears filling my eyes. She didn't notice. When she went to change back into her clothes, the tailor handed me the receipt for the fitting. I glanced at the number and felt a lump in my throat. It was more than I made in a month. I folded it and handed it back quietly, trying not to show the shock. On the way home, Emily chatted about her honeymoon plans, and I listened, smiling in all the right places when she dropped me off. She said casually, "Love you, Mom, and thanks for coming." I waved as she drove away, then stood on the porch long after her car disappeared down the road. That night, I opened my old box of keepsakes under the bed. Inside were letters Emily had written as a child, drawings of us holding hands, little notes that said, "I love you, Mommy, you're my best friend." I held one close to my heart and whispered, "You still are my best friend, sweet girl, even if you don't remember right now." The next morning, I woke early and walked to the community center where I volunteered twice a week teaching sewing classes to older women. We were preparing for a charity project, making dresses for young brides who couldn't afford them, as I helped an elderly woman thread her needle. She smiled and said, "You have a kind heart. Dear, the world sees it even when you don't." Her words stayed with me that day as I sewed the lace trim on a soft white gown for a girl I had never met. The stitches felt slow but sure, each one carrying a piece of my love and quiet pride. When I finished the dress, I folded it gently and thought about Emily, about how much I still wanted her to feel my love, even if she couldn't see it in my old clothes. What I didn't know then was that this simple act, this small moment, would change everything, that the very stitches I made for a stranger would one day find their way back to my daughter in the most unexpected way. The next few weeks passed quietly. The wedding day was getting closer, and the house was filled with lists and plans. Emily called me often, but her voice sounded rushed, busy, full of details about decorations, flowers, guest lists, and photographers. I always said the same thing: "That sounds wonderful. Sweetheart, I'm so proud of you." But when the call ended, I would sit by the window with my tea, staring out at the fading light, feeling a strange kind of emptiness. At the diner where I worked part-time, I started taking extra shifts, hoping to save a little for a wedding gift I wanted to give Emily. Something meaningful, something from my heart, not just money or things I couldn't afford anyway. So every night after work, I stopped by the community center and continued sewing the charity dresses. It gave me peace and purpose and a place to pour my love when I felt unseen. One afternoon, as I sat stitching lace onto another gown, the coordinator, Mrs. Lang, came over with a smile. She said, "There's a young bride who just applied for one of the dresses we've made. She's had a rough time recently, lost her job and almost canceled her wedding. Would you mind finishing this one for her? Dear, you have such a careful touch." I looked down at the half-finished gown and smiled. I'd be honored. For the next few evenings, I worked on it after dinner. The gown was simple but beautiful, satin and lace, soft and glowing under the lamplight. Each stitch I made felt like a quiet prayer. May this bride feel loved. May she walk with confidence. May she know someone believes in her. I didn't know her name or her story, but it didn't matter. Then one morning my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice was sharp, almost frantic. "Mom, you're still coming to the rehearsal dinner, right?" I paused, wiping my hands on a towel. "Of course I am, honey. I wouldn't miss it," she sighed. "Okay, good. Just remember, we'll be having it at the country club. It's kind of formal, so please wear something nice." She hesitated before adding, "Maybe not that old blue dress." "Okay." The words hit me softly but deeply, like a bruise forming under the skin. I managed to say, "I'll find something pretty. I promise." She said, "Love you, Mom. See you soon," and hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about all the sacrifices over the years, every extra hour at the diner, every time I'd gone without, just to make sure she had enough. I wasn't angry. I was just sad that she saw me as an embarrassment. Now the girl who once held my hand so tightly at school plays now seemed ashamed of who I was. The next day I went to the thrift store again, hoping to find something better, but nothing felt right. The dresses were too bright or too dull, too tight or too loose. And then I stopped by the sewing center before heading home. Mrs. Lang smiled as she handed me a box. "It's finished, dear." She said, "Your dress for the charity bride is ready to be delivered. Isn't it beautiful?" When I opened the box, my breath caught the gown was stunning, the same one I had poured hours into finishing the light, caught the lace in a way that made it shimmer, like morning dew. Mrs. Lang said, "The organization that connected us to the bride arranged for a private fitting tomorrow at Lillian's boutique downtown. Could you take it there for her?" I nodded yes, holding the box carefully, like something sacred. The next day, I went to the boutique. The owner, Lillian, greeted me warmly and led me to a small dressing area. She said, "The bride will be here soon. You can wait here if you'd like." I smiled and sat quietly. When the door opened, I froze for a second. The young woman who walked in was my daughter, Emily. She didn't see me at first. She was laughing and talking to her maid of honor. The boutique owner greeted her warmly and said, "Your custom gown just arrived. Let's see if it fits perfectly." Emily's eyes widened. She said, "Oh, thank goodness, I was so worried it wouldn't be ready." My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the truth. The gown I had sewn for the charity bride was hers. She didn't know it and no one else did. I felt tears rising, but I held them back as the owner helped her step into the gown. When Emily turned toward the mirror, her eyes filled with tears. She whispered softly, "It's perfect." I quietly turned to leave before she saw me. My heart was trembling, not from sadness, but from something deep and quiet, love, the kind that never needs recognition. As I stepped outside the boutique, I smiled to myself and whispered, "That's my girl." That evening, Emily called me again. Her voice was softer this time. "Mom, I just wanted to say the dress turned out amazing. I can't even describe it. I wish you could have been there when I tried it on." I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "I'm glad, sweetheart. You'll be a beautiful bride." She laughed lightly. "I hope so. Thanks, Mom." When I hung up the phone, I sat on the porch looking at the sunset. The colors spread across the sky like a painting. I felt peace for the first time in weeks because I knew even if she never found out it was me, even if she never said thank you, I had still been a part of her happiness in the quietest way possible. But fate has a strange way of revealing love at the right moment, and what happened next would be something neither of us could have ever expected. The morning of the wedding arrived with soft golden light streaming through my window. I woke before dawn, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat quietly watching the steam rise from the mug. I thought about everything that had led to this day, all the years of struggle, the laughter, the nights I stayed up worrying about bills, the birthdays we celebrated with homemade cakes and paper decorations, and now here she was, grown and radiant, ready to begin a new life. I pulled out the pale lavender dress I had chosen from the thrift store. It wasn't new and it wasn't fancy, but it was clean and pressed. I ran my fingers over the fabric, thinking of how Emily used to play dress-up with my old clothes when she was a child, twirling and giggling in front of the mirror, saying, "Mommy, look, I'm beautiful." And I would tell her, "You've always been beautiful, my love, inside and out." As I got ready, I couldn't help but think about the gown I had stitched for her. Without her knowing, I felt both proud and sad. Proud that my hands had created something that made her feel special, and sad that I had to keep it a secret. I brushed my hair back, tied it neatly, and looked at my reflection. I whispered softly, "You did good, Margaret, you did good." When I arrived at the church, the place was full of laughter, music, and flowers, people moving everywhere, photographers snapping pictures, guests chatting, the air buzzing with joy. I stood quietly near the back, clutching my small purse, my heart beating fast as I watched Emily walk down the aisle on her father-in-law's arm. She looked breathtaking in that dress, glowing like a dream. I felt tears sting my eyes as I whispered a prayer under my breath. Thank you, God, for letting me see this moment. Throughout the ceremony, I sat quietly smiling, though a deep ache pressed against my chest. It wasn't loneliness, it was something softer, something like love that had grown too big for words. When they exchanged vows, I remembered her as a little girl standing on a chair in the kitchen helping me bake cookies, her tiny hands covered in flour, saying, "Someday I'll make cookies for my husband too." After the ceremony, everyone moved to the reception hall. The music was loud, the food smelled wonderful, and laughter filled the air. I sat at the table near the corner, enjoying the sight of her dancing, spinning, laughing, so full of life. And even though she hadn't spent much time with me that day, it was enough just to see her happy. Then came the speeches, the best man spoke, then the maid of honor, then her husband, and finally Emily took the microphone. Her voice trembled slightly as she said, "I just want to thank everyone for being here today, and especially those who've helped us get here." She paused, glancing toward her new husband, then back at the crowd. "And there's one person who isn't on the program, but I need to thank her too." I felt my heart flutter. As she continued, "My mom," she looked around the room, her eyes searching until they found mine sitting quietly in the corner. She smiled softly. "The truth is, my mom and I haven't always seen eye to eye lately. He said some things I shouldn't have. I've been caught up in my own world. But today, when I put on this dress, something in me changed." The room went silent. Every face turned toward her. She said, "I found out this morning that this gown was made by her hands. I didn't know until the boutique owner told me. They said it was part of a community donation project, and that a woman named Margaret spent weeks sewing every detail. And when I heard that name, I knew it was her." My breath caught, and I felt my eyes fill instantly with tears. Emily's voice shook as she went on, "Mom, I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough. You've always been enough. You've been my strength, my teacher, my hero. I laughed when I shouldn't have, and I forgot to thank you for everything you've done. But I know now that I've carried your love in everything I wear and everything I am." The guests began clapping softly, but I couldn't move. Emily walked down from the stage, her heels clicking softly on the floor until she reached me. She took my hands and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know how much you've given until now." I stood slowly, my lips trembling, and said, "Oh, honey, you don't need to be sorry. Love doesn't need to be noticed to be real." She hugged me tight, and for a long moment everything else faded away. The lights, the music, the whispers around us. None of it mattered. It was just her and me. Later that evening, as the stars blinked above and the guests danced under strings of golden lights, Emily came to sit beside me again. She took my hand and said quietly, "I used to think you were old-fashioned. But now I understand you were strong. You worked so hard for us. You gave without expecting anything back. I hope someday I can be half the woman you are." I smiled and said, "You already are, sweetheart. You just didn't know it yet." As the night ended, she walked me to the car, still holding my hand like she did when she was a child. She said, "Mom, will you stay with us a few days after the honeymoon? I want to talk more." I nodded, tears glistening in my eyes. "Of course, my love. I'd like that very much." When I drove home, the roads were empty and the world felt still. The moon hung low, bright, and peaceful. I turned off the radio and let silence fill the car, just the sound of my heart beating steady and calm. I thought about how life can twist and bend us, but somehow love always finds a way back. And as I pulled into my driveway, I looked at my small house, the porch light flickering softly, and whispered to the night, "She's going to be okay. My little girl is going to be okay." The days after the wedding felt like quiet sunshine after a long storm. Emily and her husband left for their honeymoon, and the house felt both peaceful and empty. I spent those mornings cleaning up little things left over from the celebration, folding napkins that smelled faintly of roses and vanilla cake. I found a small piece of lace on the kitchen counter, one that had fallen from her gown, and I held it in my hand for a long time, tracing the stitches, thinking of every thread that connected us. When Emily came back from her trip, she called me the very next morning, her voice light and full of excitement. She said, "Mom, can I come over? I made coffee and cinnamon rolls just like you used to." I smiled hearing her words and said, "I'll be right there, sweetheart." When I arrived, she opened the door with a wide smile, wearing an apron too big for her. She looked like the little girl who used to stand on a stool beside me while we baked. I stepped inside and smelled the sweetness of cinnamon and sugar and memories. We sat at her kitchen table, and for the first time in a long while, she reached for my hands. "Mom," she said softly, "I need to tell you something important. When I saw that dress, I realized how much I had missed you. I thought growing up meant leaving everything behind, but now I see it means carrying you with me. I've been selfish and blind, and I want to make things right. I looked at her and said, "You don't need to make anything right, love. You already did. The moment you opened your heart." She wiped her tears and smiled that same shy smile she used to give me after breaking a dish when she was small. She said, "I want you to come live with us, Mom. Not just for a few days, but always. This house feels too quiet without you." I laughed, softly shaking my head. "Oh, sweetheart, I don't want to intrude. Newlyweds need space and freedom." She squeezed my hand tighter and said, "No, Mom, I need you not as a guest, but as my family. You've always been the safest place I've ever known." I stayed quiet for a moment, feeling the warmth in my chest. I looked around at her home, the little touches. She'd already added the curtains she sewed herself, the soft scent of lavender candles, and I thought maybe this was what love looked like when it finally bloomed after years of silence. So I said softly, "Okay, my love, I'll stay for a while." Those weeks became the happiest I had felt in years. Every morning I helped her cook breakfast. We laughed over burnt toast and spilled coffee. Her husband Mark was kind and respectful and always made sure to pull my chair out at dinner, saying, "Mrs. Thompson, you remind me of my own mom." It felt like I'd gained another child, not lost one. Sometimes at night I'd sit on the porch watching the stars, thinking of my late husband John. I'd whisper, "You'd be proud of her, love. She found her way back." And in those quiet moments I felt him close, like a gentle hand resting on my shoulder. But life has a way of testing love in the most unexpected ways. A few months later, Emily lost her job at the design firm where she'd worked for years. I could see the worry in her eyes. As she tried to hide the bills that arrived in the mail, I'd find her sitting up late on the couch laptop, open tears in her eyes as she searched for new work. I didn't say much. I just brewed her tea and sat beside her in silence. Sometimes love doesn't need words. One morning she woke up and found me sewing at the kitchen table. I was repairing an old tablecloth when she asked, "Mom, why do you still sew so much?" I smiled and said, "Because fabric listens, it never interrupts." She laughed softly and sat beside me watching my hands move. I said, "You know, sweetheart, when times got hard, I used to sew little things for neighbors or the local shop. It didn't pay much, but it kept the lights on. Maybe you should start something of your own. Use that creativity of yours." Her eyes brightened a little and she said, "Maybe I could design custom dresses online. I have ideas, but I don't know where to start." I said, "You start with what you have, love." That's how I started everything. So we began together. We cleared the small guest room and turned it into a little workspace. She set up her sewing machine and I helped her organize fabric and sketches. She worked late into the night and I sat beside her, hemming sleeves, threading needles, offering quiet advice. When she asked, it reminded me of when she was a little girl, building doll houses out of cardboard with her tiny hands covered in glue and glitter. She had always been a creator. Weeks turned into months, and slowly her little business grew. Orders came from friends and friends of friends. Then one day, a well-known local boutique owner placed a big order for wedding gowns. I watched her dance around the living room in joy, her laughter filling the air, and my heart swelled so full I thought it might burst. The day the first big delivery went out, she hugged me and said, "Mom, I couldn't have done this without you." I smiled and said, "You could have, but I'm glad I was here to see it." Her design started gaining attention online, and soon she was featured in a local magazine. The article was titled, "The Daughter Who Sewed Her Dreams and Her Mother's Hands Behind the Seams." She brought home a copy and handed it to me saying, "Mom, look what they wrote about us. They called me brave, but I think the brave one is you." I laughed and said, "No, love, we're both brave. We just fight different battles." As the months rolled by, her business flourished, and with it came peace between us. We started hosting small gatherings in her home, neighbors, friends, women who had struggled and survived like us. Emily would share her story of failure and rebirth, and I'd sit in the back quietly listening, tears glistening in my eyes. As she'd say, I learned that strength doesn't always come from the world. Sometimes it comes from the woman who raised you. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she came to sit beside me on the porch. She placed her head on my shoulder like she used to when she was little and said, "Mom, do you ever miss Dad?" I nodded quietly. "Every day, sweetheart, but I think he's happy now, watching you live this life you built." She said, "I hope so. I want him to see that I finally understand what love really means." I looked out at the fading sky, the colors melting into soft gold, and whispered, He does love like this never dies. That night before bed, I found a small note on my nightstand written in her handwriting. It said, "Thank you, Mom, for teaching me that the best dresses aren't made of fabric but of patience and love." I pressed the note to my heart and closed my eyes, smiling through tears. In that moment, I knew my life had come full circle. The little girl who once laughed at my old clothes now wore strength sewn from my quiet hands. And as I drifted to sleep, I thought maybe this was what every mother dreams of. Not perfection, not praise, just the simple peace of knowing her child finally saw her, not as old or outdated, but as love itself. The following months passed in a blur of warmth and quiet laughter. But life, as it often does, decided to test us again. One morning I woke with a sharp pain in my chest, a reminder that years of hard work, long hours at the diner, and late nights at the sewing machine had left their mark. I brushed it off, thinking it was just stress, but the discomfort lingered and the shortness of breath made climbing the stairs a struggle. Emily noticed immediately. She came running into the kitchen. When I paused halfway up carrying a basket of laundry, "Mom, you're pale," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you need to sit down?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Love just a little tired." She wasn't convinced, but I didn't want to worry her. I'd spent decades taking care of her. Now it was time to shield her from the fragility I felt creeping into my bones. Days passed and the pain returned, sharper and more persistent. Finally, I agreed to visit Dr. Reynolds, a kind woman with gentle hands and a voice that made fear feel smaller. After a series of tests, she looked at me gravely and said, "Margaret, your heart is weakened. You've done too much for too long, and now it's time to rest." The words hit me like a cold wind. Rest, me, the woman who had built so much in silence, who had carried every burden, who had sewn dreams and love into every stitch, now being told to step back. When I returned home, Emily met me at the door, worry etched into every line of her face. She grabbed my hands and said, "Mom, you have to promise me you'll take care of yourself." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. I whispered, "I will, love, I will." But it felt strange, almost unnatural, to accept care rather than give it. Over the next few weeks, Emily took the lead. She managed the sewing business with a gentle but firm hand, keeping orders on track, communicating with clients, and making sure everything ran smoothly. She had grown into the woman I always hoped she'd become, strong yet compassionate, capable yet kind. I watched her from the porch as she carried boxes of fabric up the stairs, greeted clients with a bright smile, and handled challenges with patience. I felt pride swelling in my chest. One afternoon, Emily came to sit beside me on the porch. She placed a warm cup of tea in my hands and said, "Mom, I know I've been selfish sometimes, laughing at things that didn't matter, ignoring the work you did silently. I've realized now it's what made me who I am, and I want you to know I see you. I see every stitch, every late night, every tear you hid behind a smile." I blinked back tears, my heart full. She continued, "I want to take care of you now, like you took care of me all those years. You built everything quietly, you gave without asking for praise. And now it's my turn to hold you, to protect you, to love you the way you loved me." The first night I let her cook dinner for me, I sat quietly at the table, watching her move through the kitchen. The aroma of fresh herbs and roasted vegetables filled the room, and it felt like a soft embrace. My heart softened, knowing the circle of care had come back to me. As days turned into weeks, Emily organized the sewing studio into a more comfortable space for me, adding soft chairs, better lighting, and even a small side table so I could sit and supervise without exhaustion. She insisted I attend only to the delicate finishing touches while she handled heavier work. I protested gently, but she laughed and said, "Mom, you've done enough, now let me do this." One evening, while the two of us were folding lace and arranging fabrics for the next batch of dresses, Emily stopped and looked at me seriously. "Mom, you built this life, and now I get to carry it with you. You didn't just give me a wedding gown. You gave me confidence, purpose, and love. That's something no money can buy." I smiled, overwhelmed, and said, "Love, you already carry it in your heart. That's the most important part. It wasn't long before word of Emily's little business continued to spread, and with it came opportunities for us to mentor other young women. She invited me to sit beside her as they visited from other towns, eager to learn how to sew, design, and run a small business. I watched her guide them with patience and understanding, her words gentle yet firm, and felt a quiet joy knowing the seed I planted in her had grown strong enough to flourish on its own. Yet there were nights when I felt weak, and my body reminded me of the years of labor and sacrifice I had endured. I would sit quietly in my chair, holding a cup of tea, and thinking about all the years of silent work, all the moments Emily had laughed at my old dresses without realizing the love woven into every thread, and in those moments a soft sadness mingled with gratitude, because life had a way of returning love to those who gave it freely. One particularly cold winter evening, Emily came into my room with a small box. She handed it to me, smiling but with tears in her eyes. "Mom," she said, "open it." I untied the ribbon and opened the box. Inside was a delicate gown, pure white with subtle lavender embroidery. I gasped softly. Emily said, "I wanted you to have this for yourself because you gave me my wedding dress in silence without a word. And now I want you to have something beautiful too, something that belongs to you." I felt tears streaming down my cheeks as I hugged her tightly. She whispered, "Mom, I see you, I hear you, and I love you." I had spent decades thinking my love would go unnoticed, that my sacrifices would fade into background, but here she was showing me that everything mattered, every quiet stitch, every sleepless night, every moment of patience. That night I lay in bed with the gown draped over a chair nearby, thinking about the journey that had brought us here, the years of laughter and tears, mistakes and growth, distance and reconciliation. I realized that the love I gave in silence had been seen in the end not by strangers, but by the one who mattered most. And as I drifted into sleep that night, I whispered softly to myself, "Thank you, Emily, for seeing me for the first time, the way I always wanted to be seen." The mornings after that night felt lighter. Somehow the sun streaming through the windows seemed warmer and softer. I would sit at the kitchen table drinking coffee, while Emily bustled about preparing for the day. Her laughter echoed through the rooms, and even when the wind outside howled or the snow piled high against the windows, it felt like home because love had finally found its voice between us. Emily's little business continued to grow. She had orders from brides across the city, and some even from neighboring towns. She worked tirelessly, but now she made sure to include me in every step. She would say, "Mom, come help me pick fabrics, or check the finishing touches, or just sit and give me your opinion." I nodded and smiled because for the first time in decades, my love was being acknowledged and valued. One afternoon, she invited a young woman into the studio. Her name was Clara. She was shy and nervous, carrying a worn dress in her arms. Emily said, "Mom, this is Clara. She's planning her wedding, but can't afford a proper gown." I looked at the dress and smiled gently. It was plain, but it carried hope. I said, "Hello, Clara, it's lovely to meet you," and together we began working on a gown that would make her feel like a bride, not just in fabric, but in spirit. As we sewed and adjusted and pinned every stitch, I caught myself thinking about my own years of silent work, the sacrifices that went unseen, but had built the foundation for my daughter's happiness, and now were spreading beyond our home into the lives of strangers. I realized then that love given quietly never truly disappears. It echoes through the lives it touches long after the giver has stopped noticing. Later that evening, Emily came to sit beside me on the porch. She wrapped her arms around me and said, "Mom, I wanted to ask you something. Why didn't you tell me it was you who made my wedding dress?" I laughed softly and shook my head. "Oh, sweetheart, sometimes love doesn't need recognition. I wanted you to feel special and happy without worrying about me. I wanted your joy to be untouched by guilt or obligation." She pressed her hand to mine and said, "But knowing it now, seeing it, I feel everything you've done. I feel the weight of your love, and it humbles me. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I smiled and said, "Emily, there's nothing to be sorry for. You've lived your life with your own struggles and growth, and now you see, and that's enough." I hugged her gently and whispered, "I love you so much, my sweet girl." As winter melted into spring, the two of us continued to work together. The studio became a small hub of creativity and care. Women and young girls would come to learn to sew, to create, to find confidence. I watched Emily guide them patiently and gently and realized that everything I had done for her had shaped her into this compassionate, capable woman. She had inherited not just my hands but my heart. One afternoon, Emily brought out a box tied with soft ribbon. She said, "Mom, open it." I lifted the lid and found a gown for me, one that I could wear for special occasions. It was simple yet elegant, a piece that carried the same care and attention I had once given to her. She smiled softly, her eyes shimmering with tears. "This is for you," she said, "because you gave me everything in silence. Now it's my turn to give you something that belongs to you." I held the gown against my chest, feeling the delicate fabric, thinking of all the years of labor and love, and whispered, "Thank you, my love, for seeing me for who I really am." She hugged me tightly and said, "I always did, Mom, I always did." From that day forward, our relationship blossomed in ways neither of us had anticipated. The unspoken distance, the misunderstandings, the fleeting moments of embarrassment and frustration, all melted away into a bond stronger than I could have imagined. Emily often said she felt like she had finally inherited not just a business, but a legacy of love, courage, and quiet perseverance. And I, in turn, felt fulfilled knowing that my years of silent sacrifice had created ripples far beyond what I could see. Sometimes late at night, we would sit on the porch together, sipping tea, watching the stars, and in those moments, Emily would rest her head on my shoulder and whisper softly, "Mom, I get it now. I see everything you've done. I know what love really means." And I would hug her close, feeling the years of worry, doubt, and distance dissolve into the soft warmth of understanding and shared life. And so, the story of my old clothes, my quiet labor, and my silent love came full circle, not through drama, not through confrontation, but through patience, courage, and unwavering care. Emily laughed at my old dresses once, but in time she understood that those dresses, like every act of love, were stitched together with hope, sacrifice, and the invisible threads of a mother's heart. The house was filled with laughter again, with creativity, and with love that was seen, felt, and shared. And as I drifted off to sleep each night, I held onto a simple truth, that the quiet acts of love and courage we give in silence are never wasted. They grow, they ripple, and they come back to us in ways more beautiful than we could ever imagine. The days that followed felt like sunlight breaking through a long winter. Emily had grown not just in skill, but in understanding of what truly mattered. She often came to me with little moments of recognition, a handwritten note tucked into my apron, a small cup of tea waiting beside my chair, her laughter ringing through the house like wind chimes. I watched her move through the studio, confident and graceful, guiding young brides and women with the same patience I had once shown her. And I felt a quiet pride that almost made my heart ache. Then one afternoon she called me into the main room of the house, her eyes shining with excitement. I followed, wondering what could have her so energized, and she gestured to a group of friends and neighbors gathered there, some holding cameras and notebooks. She said, "Mom, I have something important to show everyone." I smiled softly, curious but calm, unsure what this could be. Emily began speaking, her voice clear and warm. "Everyone," she said, "I want you to meet the woman who made all of this possible, the dresses, the care, the quiet strength behind everything you see. Margaret Thompson, my mother, she worked tirelessly for years, raising me, teaching me, and showing love in ways I didn't fully appreciate until recently everyone turned toward me, and suddenly I felt a wave of warmth and embarrassment as their eyes met mine. Some faces were smiling, others held awe and respect." She continued, "Mom made my wedding dress in secret. Without anyone knowing, she spent hours stitching, sewing, and creating so that I could have something beautiful to wear on one of the most important days of my life. I was young and foolish," she said, "and I didn't see the sacrifices, the late nights, the years of care, but now I do, and I want everyone to know what she has done." Tears welled in my eyes as I tried to stand tall while my hands shook slightly. I whispered softly, "Emily, you don't need to do this," but she shook her head and said, "Yes, Mom, I do, because people need to know that love doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers through action, through patience, through the quiet courage to keep giving even when no one notices." The room fell silent for a moment. Then gentle applause began, soft at first, and gradually growing stronger. I saw the young women I had mentored smile and nod. Remembering the lessons I had shared with them, I saw neighbors and friends whose lives I had touched through small acts of kindness. Eyes glistening with tears, they saw me not as an old woman in simple dresses, but as someone whose hands and heart had built something far greater than myself. Emily stepped closer, holding my hand tightly, and said, "Mom, I want you to know that I finally understand everything you gave me. All the silent work, the love you never asked to be noticed, it shaped me, it made me who I am, and now I want to honor you publicly, not because you need it, but because the world deserves to see what love looks like." I felt my chest swell with emotion, tears streaming freely down my face, and I whispered softly, "Emily, you have no idea how happy this makes me." She smiled and pressed her forehead to mine softly, and said, "I think I always knew, Mom, deep down, but now everyone else can know too." The room erupted in applause again, and I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Clara, the young bride whose dress I had helped finish months ago. She said, "Thank you for everything you've done for me and for so many women like me. You've given us hope and dignity." I looked at her and nodded quietly, feeling a warmth in my heart unlike anything I had ever experienced. Over the next few hours, people shared stories of how the dresses I had sewn, the advice I had given, the quiet patience I had shown had impacted their lives. Some laughed, remembering little mishaps. Others wept softly in gratitude. I held Emily's hand through it all, realizing that love, when given fully and sincerely, always finds its way back, sometimes in ways we could never imagine. That evening, as the gathering dispersed, Emily and I sat together on the porch. The sky was painted with streaks of gold and pink, the stars beginning to twinkle in the distance. She said, "Mom, I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for everything. But you know what I want to do? I want to live a life that honors what you've shown me. Kindness, courage, love, selflessness." I smiled, my heart full, and said, "You already are, Emily, every day." I felt a deep peace settle over me, the kind that comes only when a life of quiet devotion is finally recognized and cherished. The years of simple dresses, of unseen work, of love given without expectation, had culminated in this moment, a circle completed, a bond restored, a legacy secured. As night fell and we sat together watching the stars, Emily leaning her head on my shoulder, I whispered softly, "You see, my love, every stitch, every effort, every moment mattered. You carry it now, and someday perhaps you'll pass it on too." And in the gentle glow of the porch light, we smiled at one another, knowing that love, patience, and courage are never wasted, and that even old dresses, when worn with heart, can tell the most powerful stories. And so the story came full circle, not with drama or confrontation, but with the quiet, enduring triumph of love, the beauty of being seen, and the fulfillment that comes from knowing that a lifetime of care and courage can finally bloom into recognition, pride, and unshakable connection. The end.